In the final days of October 2025, the surface of the southern Caribbean Sea remained deceptively calm. Fishing skiffs drifted lazily near coastlines, merchant vessels plied established routes, and island nation capitals awaited the next seasonal storm. Yet beneath that veneer of routine, a new ripple of strategic activity was taking shape, one that suggests a significant recalibration of U.S. naval posture in the region. On 27th of October, the government of Venezuela announced the immediate suspension of major energy agreements with its neighbor Trinidad and Tobago. The reason, declared by President Nicolas Maduro, was the arrival of a U.S. warship in Trinidad for joint naval exercises with the U.S. Navy, a move he characterized as instrumental to U.S. military strategy in our region. Simultaneously, on 28 October, defense and security analysts reported that the mammoth nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford was now bound for the Caribbean Sea as part of a broader U.S. mission, described publicly as a counter-narcotics effort, but interpreted by many regional observers as a strategic show of force amid heightened tensions. These twin developments, economic leverage and military deployment, signal a shifting dynamic in the hemisphere. For your viewers, this moment is not about storm warnings or maritime accidents. It is about presence, posture, and power projection. Because transporting a warship is not simply logistical, it is strategic. Transferring energy agreements, suspending treaties, docking destroyers, each move carries a silent message. Section 1. The energy rift and military signals. Trinidad and Tobago, long reliant on Venezuelan natural gas exports and the Dragon gas field development, found itself caught in the cross-currents of diplomacy and military maneuver. President Maduro's decision to pause the gas accord came moments after the U.S.-guided missile destroyer USS Gravely arrived in Port of Spain for exercises with the Trinidadian Navy. The Venezuelan government accused Trinidad of transforming into an aircraft carrier of the American empire, echoing language of provocation and mobilizing nationalist sentiment. From the U.S. perspective, cooperation with Trinidad and Tobago represents a foothold in a maritime region bordering Venezuela, a key transit zone for both energy and illicit maritime flows. By basing a warship and conducting joint drills, the U.S. signals that its operational reach now extends to smaller states traditionally viewed as stable partners. But for Caracas, it is unacceptable. The timing and proximity of U.S. forces triggered accusations of possible regime change strategy, disguised as counter-narcotics. In its 26 October statement, Venezuela asserted that joint U.S.-Trinidad exercises include a planned false flag operation aimed at framing Caracas, citing arrested mercenaries linked to U.S. intelligence. Whether the allegations have merit or not, the effect is real. A regional diplomatic rift opens as military assets move in. For your channel's narrative, this is the arithmetic of power at sea. A warship, a treaty canceled, a destroyer docks, headlines in Caracas, energy routes, naval presence, regional diplomatic posture, all interlinked. Section 2. The carrier enters the scene. At the center of this shift is the Gerald R. Ford, the world's most advanced aircraft carrier. According to an October 28 report, the carrier will join the Caribbean theater to strengthen the U.S.'s ability to detect, monitor, and dismantle illicit actors and activities threatening the homeland and Western Hemisphere. It is not just the arrival of a ship. It is the arrival of a platform that carries symbolic, operational, and financial weight. The Ford is nuclear-powered, capable of launching aircraft via electromagnetic catapults, and has an air wing numbering up to 90 aircraft. Its presence in a region accustomed to patrols by smaller vessels now signals a step change. Analysts note that while the carrier may not be best suited for traditional drug boat interdiction, its deployment serves as an unmistakable message. Conflict capability exists, and it is closer than assumed. As the Ford moves toward the Caribbean, its journey passes through familiar waters that carry new meaning. Each nautical mile shifts the calculation from training and deterrence toward presence and preparedness. For viewers, the point is stark. A carrier in the region is less about what it does today, and more about what it could do tomorrow. Section 3. Logistics of presence. Deploying a carrier strike group is a massive undertaking. It requires fuel, supply chains, spare parts, maintenance support, squadron coordination, and allied access. The logistical footprint covers thousands of personnel and tens of thousands of components. It is as much economic as naval. As the Ford approaches the region, the supply network from Virginia shipyards to Caribbean ports becomes the invisible axis of power. In parallel, regional insurance and shipping markets note that heavy naval traffic in the southern Caribbean could affect trade flow, maritime risk premiums, and commercial routing. For example, local ports in northern Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Dutch Caribbean observe naval exercises and adjust accordingly. These are subtle signals, but they matter when the world's oceans double as strategic corridors. The Ford's presence also raises questions of endurance. Aircraft carriers are scarce assets. The U.S. Navy typically has only a handful at sea at any time. Assigning one to the Caribbean means either reallocation from another theater or expansion of capacity, both with cost and consequence. Analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies note that the Caribbean deployment is too big to be just about drugs, too small for full war, but significant enough that it is there to do something. For your audience, presence is not passive. It means readiness, supply, coordination, and cost. When a carrier arrives, everything around it adjusts, from logistics to economy to diplomacy. Section 4. Regional responses and diplomatic undercurrents. The immediate reaction from Venezuela speaks volumes. Caracas accused both the U.S. and Trinidad and Tobago of orchestrating a false flag incident intended to draw Venezuela into a broader confrontation. Meanwhile, on the island of Trinidad and Tobago, political leadership defended cooperation with the U.S., emphasizing sovereignty and security interests. The suspension of the gas accord serves as a reminder that naval maneuvers intersect not only with maritime strategy but also with energy diplomacy and regional economics. This interplay of naval power and energy politics is increasingly visible. The Dragon gas field dispute, the historical energy movement between Venezuela and Trinidad, and now joint naval exercises all converge. When the U.S. docks a destroyer in Port of Spain, it is not simply military theater. It is politics, resource theology, and message combined. The broader Caribbean region watches. Smaller nations assess how U.S. presence affects not only security but autonomy. When a major power deploys a carrier, local decisions, from port visits to training exercises, change. For smaller nations, the choice to host or not host becomes strategic. Section 5. What it means for the U.S. Navy and the hemisphere. The deployment of the Ford and the docking of U.S. warships in Trinidad may mark a turning point. For the U.S. Navy, it reflects a shift from episodic deployments toward theater-based readiness. A carrier in the Caribbean weeks ahead of a major natural disaster or regional crisis could be a distinction between reactive and proactive operations. In broader terms, the move signals that the hemisphere is again a zone of naval competition, not just for crime interdiction, but for influence. When a carrier becomes part of the conversation in energy deals and diplomatic protests, naval power transcends the visible. For strategic analysts, the message is clear. The U.S. remains willing to project heavy power into its backyard. Whether this is about drug trafficking, deterrence, or regime pressure, the optics are unmistakable. The horizon ahead felt both familiar and new as the carrier strike group advanced into the Caribbean theater. A formation of steel and strategy, ships, aircraft, men, moving with purpose. What the world saw was a convoy. What it represented was an engine of influence built for endurance. Section 1. A strike group in motion. At the nucleus of this buildup is the USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, the U.S. Navy's most advanced aircraft carrier, nuclear-powered and purpose-built for the 21st century fight. The Ford carries upwards of 5,000 sailors and aircrew, a flight deck of more than 75 aircraft, and a technology suite designed to project power globally. As the Ford steamed from the Mediterranean toward the Caribbean, its escorts, a group of guided missile destroyers, littoral combat ships, and amphibious vessels, converged under a unified command. According to defense analysts, this is the largest naval buildup in the region in decades. Take one moment aboard the Ford. The deck ramp is alive with activity as FA-18 Super Hornets taxi to the catapults. Remote-piloted drones taxi alongside, and support crews in colored jerseys direct each move. Every takeoff, every launch sequence is a prepared response to unseen threats. For sailors aboard, the routine is calm. For observers, it becomes a visible demonstration of capability. The journey was not simply transition, it was transformation. The region the strike group entered had previously hosted patrols and Coast Guard assets. Now it hosts a floating city of deterrence and readiness. A carrier in the Caribbean sea lane signifies a shift in posture, from reactive to proactive. Section 2. Logistics, the invisible backbone. While grand imagery of jets taking off draw attention, the real story lies below decks and across the oceans. A carrier strike group's effectiveness depends on supply lines, fuel, munitions, maintenance, parts, food, medicine, all flowing from shores to ship. On this deployment, the logistical axis stretched thousands of miles, from U.S. East Coast shipyards to Caribbean refueling bases. Reports note that maritime insurers and regional port authorities are already adjusting operations, tracking the naval assets and recalculating risk in what had been considered benign waters. The fact that commercial shipping reacts to a military deployment underscores how closely economics and strategy intertwine. Behind the scenes, inventory managers aboard the Ford monitor spare parts manifests, supply vessels load pallets with joint spare unit kits, and logistics officers coordinate cross-service support. What may look like a warship gliding through waves is actually a node in a network of global readiness. The magnitude matters. The Navy has only a limited number of carriers, only a handful of strike groups. Choosing to deploy the Ford in the Caribbean, rather than in the Indo-Pacific or Mediterranean, requires sacrifice and prioritization. As one strategic brief suggested, this is too big to be just about counter-drugs. It is a message. For your viewer, the takeaway is clear. Command of the seas lies as much in the movement of fuel trucks and shipping manifests as it does in missile salvos. Section 3. Regional dynamics and diplomatic undercurrents. While the naval assets move beneath the surface, regional capitals respond above it. On 27 October 2025, the government of Trinidad and Tobago hosted a U.S. guided missile destroyer for joint exercises, an action that triggered a diplomatic escalation. The neighboring nation, Venezuela, announced a suspension of long-standing energy agreements with Trinidad, framing the ship visit as hostile and strategic. In effect, the naval movement crossed into economic diplomacy. A warship at port, joined by U.S. personnel and drills, became the catalyst for the cancellation of a natural gas treaty. For Washington, cooperation with small regional states is part of its hemispheric strategy. For Caracas, it is a threat to sovereignty. These interactions matter. When naval presence triggers energy policy shifts, the theater of operations expands from sea lane to shoreline, from missile defense to resource security. Your audience should note, naval power does not end at the horizon. It ripples into boardrooms and parliament chambers. Section 4. Technology and surveillance. Edge. The capabilities of the Ford are significant, but its deployment also leverages advanced systems that change the nature of naval warfare. The ship's electromagnetic aircraft launch system, EMALS, replaces traditional steam catapults, increasing sortie rate and reducing maintenance downtime. On patrol, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, orbit distant sectors, forward-deployed sensor nets map maritime traffic, and underwater acoustic systems monitor potential adversary submarines. The Caribbean, once quiet waters, now feature persistent surveillance and layered systems of detection. One commentator noted, Caribbean sea lanes are no longer corridors, they are arenas. This integration of hardware and data means that the Ford is more than a war platform. It is a command node in a networked architecture of deterrence. In simpler terms, the ship matters. The systems it connects to matter more. Section 5. Strategy, economics, and message. Beyond ships and systems lies strategy. The deployment communicates three central themes: deterrence, reach, and endurance. Deterrence, because the presence of such a ship demands consideration from regional actors. Reach, because the U.S. can insert its largest asset into its own hemisphere. Endurance, because the logistics and technology create sustained operations rather than momentary flashes. The economic dimension cannot be ignored. Industry analysts report that defense firms contract increases, ship repair yards prepare for extended maintenance, and insurance markets monitor shifts in maritime risk. These are not peripheral. They are core to the operational model. Every sortie and every port call affects budgets, shareholders, and supply chains. For your audience, Understanding naval power means understanding economics, diplomacy, and strategy, not just warships. Section 6. Human element and operational tempo. Amid the steel, the human rhythm continues. Flight deck crews hustle before dawn. Marines aboard amphibious vessels don gear for exercises. Intelligence officers parse hours of UAV footage. And sailors stand watches on the bridge as radar sweeps the horizon. The tempo is deliberate. It is not punctuated by loud explosions. Instead, it pulses with readiness. For many personnel, this deployment is one of their most important missions, not because they are fighting today, but because they may deter tomorrow. Consider one moment. On the Ford, maintenance crews replace landing gear components, logistics teams reload spare parts bins, and the mess hall pushes another meal. These operations are mundane, but without them, the mission fails. Your viewers should remember, presence is maintained not when flashes occur, but when systems hum.